What is going on, everybody? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out podcast, talking football right around the corner. Davante Adams, Joe Burrow, we got you covered. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you may listen. If you're listening live, do it on AMP. Download the Amazon AMP app, as well as if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down there in the comment section and watch our content. We got a lot of stuff. We got you covered: football, basketball, even a little PGA Tour. But first, before we dive into some football, can I tell you about my friends at Gametime, the official ticketing app of this show? Here's what I need you to do. I need you to download the Gametime app on your phone and use the promo code JOHN and get $20 off to concerts, baseball games. You want to do something fun this summer? Of course you do. You want to get outside, take in the sun, have some drinks, enjoy yourself? Do it on me. Download the Gametime app, fastest growing ticketing app in America. You can go to any sporting event, any concert, any comedy show, and when you use the promo code JOHN, John, you get $20 off your pair of tickets. Can't beat it. A couple big stories this week were Davante Adams and Joe Burrow, two of the best players in the league, kind of drew some headlines. There was a long article on Davante Adams, and there were some quotes from Joe Burrow. Now, Joe Burrow talked about his contract because he is contract extension eligible. And he's clearly, got a chance to go down as, one of the best players in franchise history, if not the best. Got a long way to go, but I'd say his career trajectory is pointing up right at the sky, right? It's already headed there. And he talked about the importance of other people getting paid. And listen, he's not dumb. He understands that for them to keep rolling, he can't do it by himself, right? LSU, loaded team. The last couple years, Jamar Chase, Tee Higgins, offensive weapons, a good defense. He gets it, right? It's why we hold, when guys act like idiots at the quarterback position, we can't take them seriously, right? Over the years. Like when that contract clause was in Kyler Murray's contract, it was an enormous story, not because of the clause, but because it was a quarterback. We're like, what? How is this possible? Now, here's the thing. The Chiefs and the Bengals are a fantastic rivalry right now, right? They've played in back-to-back conference championships. They've each won one. Both games could have gone either way. You could argue the two best quarterbacks in the league. Obviously, Mahomes is the best, and Joe Burrow is right there in conversation. I know they beat Josh Allen, but I think that's fair up for debate. But here's the thing. The Chiefs have maintained this winning with everyone being paid, right? Patrick Mahomes has a large contract. Travis Kelce, they're lucky, plays a position that does not command offensive tackle or defensive end or wide receiver money, right? They have a highly, highly paid defensive lineman in Chris Jones. They made a pivot off Tyreek Hill because of financial constraints, and it's impossible to pay everybody. And the thing when you look at the Bengals roster, which is going to be interesting, because Joe Burrow is getting extended. Jamar Chase is never going anywhere. I think what you have to ask yourself a question is, can you afford to pay two premium wide receivers? Now, Tee Higgins would get less than Jamar Chase, but ideally when you build your team, you kind of spread it out through different positions. You can't have two $20+ million wide receivers for several years. It's just not going to work out. There was a reason that the 49ers, I think, discussed trading Brandon Ayuk, not because he's not a sweet player, because they're paying Deebo Samuel huge money. And if they were to extend Ayuk or next year on his 5th-year option, that would be a lot of money allocated to two guys at a premium position, right? So it becomes very complicated. And it's the hard part about team building in the NFL is ideally over, a several-year period, you have a sweet defensive lineman, you have a sweet offensive lineman, you have one sweet wide receiver. Obviously, you need more than one, but you have other guys that aren't being paid as much. And it's going to be very, very fascinating. I remember talking to a buddy on the Chiefs. He's like, they're good. I mean, obviously. It's you watch the two teams, and it could have gone either way this year in the conference championship game. Basically, we'll see what it looks like once they start paying everybody. And, Higgins is going to be the cheapest, and he's $20+ million a year. Even if Joe Burrow, quote unquote, takes some sort of discount, he's making 45 plus. Jamar Chase in a year is going to command, whatever Justin Jefferson gets this year, probably a couple percent more. So the three of those guys, if they extend the ball, and clearly Burrow and Chase are going nowhere, I do understand the Higgins. It just puts him in a tough spot. Now, I'm not into trading Tee Higgins, but I just wonder, can you afford to pay everybody and build a competitive roster big picture? I do think that's a fair question mark to ask. And I think when you look at the Bengals, and Joe Burrow gets this, it's probably going to be a little more complicated than you think. Like the Chiefs were lucky. Kind of was pretty easy, right? They had a quarterback. They had a defensive pass rusher. They had one wide receiver. And their other sweet player played a position that, like, sometimes when your best player is like a middle linebacker or a safety or a tight end, you get financially lucky because their positions do not ask for the prices. Like, is there any difference between Travis Kelce and Davante Adams in terms of production, in terms of the ability to win with, or Tyreek Hill? Obviously not. Like, he's every bit as good as all the elite players at the wide receiver position. Well, Google their salaries. The Chiefs save a dramatic amount of money because his position. Now, we could argue that's unfair, and I believe it is. Like, Travis Kelce and George Kittle are worth every bit, of $23, $24, $25 million a year. But that's not what their position pays, right? So it'll be very, very fascinating how the Bengals handle all this, because they got keeper players, but the three guys you want to keep, their salaries would add up really, really fast. And could they build a complete team, which I would say they've close to had the last several years. Obviously, they had some flaws. You would like a little bit better offensive line. You could argue their corners could be much improved. But, you get to a Super Bowl with a very good chance to win, and you have an opportunity to win on the road again against the Chiefs. Like, your team's pretty damn good. And one of the reasons it's been so good is because financially they've had a lot of advantages. All these guys are on rookie contracts, and that's about to change. Davante Adams. If you haven't read the Ringer article, I skimmed through it. I'm sure you've seen a lot of the headlines. And let me preface everything by saying this. I love Davante Adams. He's a Fresno State guy. We didn't overlap, but a lot of people that I worked with did. They swear by him. They love him. Everyone I've ever known that has been around the guy, swears by the work ethic, the drive, the desire. His production in games speaks for itself. He's not just a winning player. He's a winning person. You want him in your organization. And I do understand that it's tough, right? For most of our lives, and I say this all the time, we have such a long runway in whatever we do. In sports, it's very short, right? Even if you're an all-time great player, like he's trending toward being, his career might be 15 years, right? 15 years. If he lives till 80, it's really a short period of time in his life. But it's a job that pays more than any other job you'll ever have unless you start some successful business. And it's just a very unique situation for pro athletes. He was in Green Bay for 10 years, one of the most successful organizations in the league. And I get, being from the West Coast, how he might have, he's admitted this. He wanted to change the scenery. He wanted to do something different, and he wanted to get back toward the West Coast. And I respect that. My only pushback is, in football, when you're part of a winner, like when you're as good as Davante is, or any player around the league who's an all-pro level guy consistently, you're going to do two things. You're going to produce, and you're going to be very, very rich. Those things are inevitable, right? And especially money. Like, no matter who Davante played for, he's going to be paid a premium. So I do think when you're factoring in where you're going to play, at wide receiver, you can't really control how good your team's going to be, right? Aaron Rodgers can immediately turn the Jets into a power. He can take them right to the playoffs and in the Super Bowl mix immediately. But if I just added Davante Adams to the Jets instead of Aaron Rodgers, and they still had, let's say they still had Mike White and Zach Wilson, I think we'd all agree they, maybe a game, but there would not be a dramatic difference. I put Aaron Rodgers and he plays at a high level, which clearly he's capable of, they immediately can win 12 games. So as a wide receiver, and just like most positions, if you're a star left tackle, if you're a star linebacker, you can only dictate so much. So when you decide to leave, which I respect, I've made change of scenery several times. But when you do that, you can't really complain, right? Because you chose this. And the Packers wanted to keep him, and he says, I want to go. And one thing he said a lot through this article was he needed to prove that he was an elite player, that it wasn't because of Aaron Rodgers. And I wonder sometimes with this generation, like historically athletes, especially great ones, always try to find some way to create a chip on their shoulder, create an edge for themselves, create some sort of motivation, which I totally respect. Everyone does. But I do think when he said that out loud, like, I don't know who said that. Like, who has ever said, I don't know if Davante would be good without Aaron Rodgers, especially the last several years. Also, it'd be one thing if it felt like some sort of, I don't want to say battle between the two, but Aaron Rodgers has been pretty outspoken the last several years that the two best players he's ever played with are Charles Woodson, who's a first ballot Hall of Famer, and Davante Adams, who is definitely trending that way. So I actually don't think there's some like what this player would be without the other guy. Hell, we saw it last year. Tyreek Hill immediately turned himself into that. And how good would Patrick Mahomes be without him? And boom, he wins the MVP, wins another Super Bowl. And Tyreek dominates. Sometimes independent from each other, those two guys are awesome, right? Rob Gronkowski would have been sweet wherever. Tom Brady could play with whoever. Like sometimes great combinations work, right? But if you split the two guys apart, they would still have a lot of success. But he chose to leave the Packers, which was his choice, to go to one of the most dysfunctional organizations we've ever seen. And in the internet age, a franchise that always loses. I mean, they've made the playoffs 2 times in basically 2.5 decades. And their 2 playoff bursts, they've lost both of them. And they were both on the road. One of them, they got destroyed the year when Derek got hurt. 2 years ago against the Bengals, game wasn't really as close as the final score indicated, even though the Raiders had a chance to tie it at the end. But Davante has to justify, and it felt like he was trying to do this in the article, why he made this move. And he kept doubling down, like, I didn't just make this move, for Derek Carr, which clearly, it's not like he demanded a trade once Derek got sent home and is now on another team. But one thing he couldn't hide, and I don't totally blame him, is like Jimmy Garoppolo is not a great quarterback fit for him. Like Jimmy Garoppolo is not obviously Aaron Rodgers, but even Derek in terms of explosive balls down the field. Like I think Davante realizes this is not going to be conducive to my success. Look at Jimmy Garoppolo in his time starting with San Francisco and wide receivers who flourished in terms of numbers. Didn't really happen. I mean, Debo was getting the ball as a running back or on quick screens, not really down the field, right? So I think Davante knows, like, this is not going to be great for me. But, like, you signed up for this. You wanted to leave Aaron Rodgers to go to the Raiders, who lose a lot and also have a coach. It'd be one thing if you went to a team and they had a coach, they had just hired a coach with a lot of success. Like Josh McDaniels as the head coach has been an utter disaster. So I get where, and I don't want to say he's being defensive, but he's trying to justify a move that I think most football fans go, yeah, probably not working out great. But trying to say, like, I'm proud to be an all-pro. Davante, you could be an all-pro playing with the Houston Texans. You're that great of a player. But I think, like, you chose to go to this franchise, it's going to be very, very difficult to win. In that division, especially now that Sean Payton's there, I think most human beings, and this is not like personal, are going to choose the Raiders to finish last. And it's going to be very difficult. Like, I'll be surprised if they don't. And, this is situation's already kind of getting a little weird with them saying, I don't think we quite see eye to eye on the offense and not sure where we're going. Yeah, man. I mean, this is what you signed up for. Before we dive into what's next, do you know that Angie's List is now Angie, your home for everything home? And as someone who is currently house shopping and who has bought property before, you walk in, you go, well, I need to fix the kitchen. I want to improve this bathroom. I want to fix some stuff in the backyard. And then you go, well, I don't do this for a living. Where do I even start? Who do I even contact? That's where Angie has 20 years of experience combined with new tools to simplify the process. Over 220,000 pros in their network. They can help you get the best price for your product. They have new projects that are priced upfront and clearly lays out the cost before you buy. With Angie, you can request quotes from multiple pros in your area. The pros in your network are locally based. In just a few taps in the Angie app or click on the site, you can have Angie tackle your home service project from start to finish. Download the free Angie mobile app today or visit Angie.com. That's ANGI.com. A couple other quick stories. There was a report several days ago that David Canter, an agent, a high-profile agent, had been offering teams and GMs and personnel people basically his vacation homes, Miami, Salt Lake City, I don't exactly know where all of them are, if they would draft his players. And one, I thought it was kind of funny. Obviously, Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, made a very big deal of it. My first reaction was like, isn't that kind of business? Isn't part of business, whatever industry you're in listening to this, is kind of taking care of your clientele? The two industries I'm the most closest to growing up and, most of my friends work in are either farming or construction. And I think there are a lot of parallels to the two of them in terms of taking care of the people you do business with or taking care of people that you want to do business with, whether it be golf trips, suites at games. For a long period of time when I was growing up, the guy my dad worked for had basically the best duck hunting in California. And a lot of people, business-wise, were taken out there for, business deals. Like, welcome to America. Isn't that the way it kind of works? Now, just because you take a guy to Pebble Beach or some sweet duck blind or the Laker or Yankee game never guarantees you're going to get the deal. Like, you still have to, whether it be construction, hit a certain number, have the capability of, getting the job done. So just because I wine and dine you or offer you some incentive, like, this is too big a business. Most industries, including the NFL, to just be like, well, this guy took me to Pebble Beach, LACC, a Laker game, and paid for 2 weeks of dinners. He's getting my business, even though he's way shittier than the other guy who didn't do that and will make me more money. That's not the way it works. Definitely not in 2023. So, yeah, he can offer me a Miami condo or wherever his vacation homes may be. But no GM is going to draft your player just because you give me a week free on the beach for my family if the guy can't play. Just like in a construction bid, I'm not going to get the bid if I am way under the number just because I took care of you and if you know that my company can't handle the job. So this notion that this shit doesn't go on, you'd either be naive, not work in the private sector, or just not quite understand how the world works. But two, anyone thinking that someone would just draft a player if you don't think the guy can play because of a couple nights stay, like, one reason that it's going to be very difficult, like when you hear some of these stories, the Alabama baseball coach just got fired for giving tips about a pitcher being scratched. And historically, there have been stories about guys throwing games in college. It's very, very difficult in 2023. And I don't worry about this at all with a player or a coach, definitely in any pro sports, but probably even now in college, in football, in NIL, when it comes to gambling, because they're all making too much money. Back when a player wasn't making that much money, and if I could offer you double his salary, you might throw the game and I might be able to influence it. But the moment I start making 7 figures, 8 figures, 50 grand, 100 grand, I don't give a shit. I make $11 million a year if I'm an NFL head coach, if I'm the starting quarterback, whatever, if I'm the starting point guard. Even if I'm the starting point guard at UCLA or Duke or North Carolina, I'm making big coin. You can't have Caleb Williams or Drake May throw a game. You know how much money those guys are making? So when I look at this, I go, yeah, he might have offered it. Offers get, thrown out all the time. in any sort of industry. Can the guy, one of whatever player he has on his roster, help my team win? Do I think he's any good? Because if I don't, then there's no chance on God's green earth I'm going to draft him. My coach is making $10 million. As a GM, I'm making anywhere from 2 to 5. My life's too good. Like I can't afford to travel wherever the fuck I want. I don't need your free beach house. Now, if I draft the guy because I like it, and then you give me the beach house, like, yeah, welcome to life. Now, Florio and those type of people are going to come after and try to get, someone in trouble, I'm sure. But to me, it's a big nothing burger. The other interesting story is one thing you've really seen in the age of podcasts and YouTube is the rise of these players that once they finish playing, or like in Pat McAfee's case, retire early just to start doing content. And just because you're a former player, if you start doing content, you might get an initial boost, but your stuff's got to be good, right? The reason Draymond Green or Pat McAfee or the Kelsey brothers are working is because if you follow or watch, or listen to their content, it's entertaining. Just because, like, if Steph Curry started a podcast tomorrow and it was boring, it would not last. I remember when I owned some Spotify stock, and they started just hiring all these people to do podcasts. Kim Kardashian, Michelle Obama, all these huge names. And I was thinking, like, well, can any of these guys host a podcast? Is it going to be entertaining? What happened after a year? Dropped them all. Wasn't working, right? Usually podcasts are run by people that know how to entertain. And there are clearly some people in the space that are kind of natural at it, right? That are really, really good. And Pat McAfee is clearly one of those guys. And it was just reported, or over the last 24 hours, that he's leaving, his operation and partnering with ESPN. And there has been a lot of blowback calling him, quote unquote, a sellout. And I have a couple opinions on this. One, I find Pat very entertaining just because he's different. Most of the media bores me. They all throw the same pitch. Every time there's a story, I know the angle they're going to take. There is not a more predictable group in 2023 than just the general media, whether it be in sports, whether it be in politics. You give me someone in the media's name and just give me a story, I'll tell you the angle they're going to take. And Pat's just different. You don't know what he's going to say. He just could come out of left field. He has on fun guests. They fuck around. It's very raw, real, and authentic, which I think we really like in 2023 moving forward. Like, I think my generation, people 40 and under, just aren't really into BS. My parents, the baby boomer generation, people that grew up in earlier generations, they could handle a lot of, just fluff. Society's just a lot different. And I think everyone that's having success now, raw and real is really it. And when you think of ESPN, you don't really feel that way, right? You don't think of that. Now, when I woke up on Thursday morning, I saw a headline from the Wall Street Journal, and this has been well reported in business circles, that Disney has been thinking about getting rid of ESPN, right? And just kind of spinning it off into its own entity and selling it to someone. And I do wonder if that element allows Pat, because I think one of his best attributes, he's got a lot of them, is it's just kind of fearless. He'll say whatever. And because of the platform he's on, YouTube, he can swear. He can just say whatever he wants, which will not be tolerated, or at least historically has not been at ESPN. Think about when Pardon My Take, Big Cat and PFT got that van show, and everyone at ESPN freaked the you-know-what out. Pardon My Take is the biggest sports podcast by a pretty wide margin. They are what anyone would call in business a cash cow. They print money. Do you know what ESPN would have done to get involved with that brand looking back? Yet they were forced because a couple people women that work for their network, if you replace, not a soul would have noticed, freaked out. And ultimately they got fired. And you could argue ESPN might be a little different now. I don't know. But, what if Pat pisses someone off and they want him gone? Now, they're paying Pat a lot of money. Maybe times have changed. But clearly he's got a lot of leverage on this. The most important thing any of us have in the podcast space is something we call IP. Do you own your podcast, or does someone else own your podcast? Right? Because if you own your podcast, it's like you own the real estate. And that's very, very important. And clearly he had a lot of leverage in the deal. He's going to own his podcast, his YouTube channel. And the one thing, ESPN does a couple things, just like any big company that you partner with does, is Pat clearly has a lot of expenses. He's got a lot of people working for him. Well, who do you think immediately then covers their insurance, right? ESPN. Who do you think immediately, I'm sure he got paid more money than he could afford to pay him or, feel comfortable paying him? Probably got all his people raises. So he took care of people, right? Which I would imagine is a big driver. The other thing that's going to happen is they're going to put him on ESPN on a daily basis. Like no one is watching. I think Get Up does pretty well with Greenberg, but these other shows, when I was in college and even I remember moving to Philly, ESPN's lineup in radio was remarkable. It was Mike and Mike, which you could call cheesy or whatever. It was an enormous revenue generating show. To Coward, to SVP and Rosillo. And I think Gottlieb was after them. I mean, it was a behemoth. And they don't care about radio anymore. And part of radio has changed, right? Look at Colin. Is Colin a radio show or is he a television show? Now, Colin's also got podcast networks. He's got a lot going on, but it's a simulcast now. And that's what Pat is. It's a simulcast. That's what all of this is. You got to be on video and you got to be on audio. But I do wonder if there are going to be limitations on his authenticity, which is what makes Pat so awesome. What makes, people kind of gravitate to him. And I bet what he would say is, listen, our ceiling, even at YouTube, is only so high, right? We get, when we get Aaron Rodgers on or a big guest on, we can get six figures watching at one time. But for the most part, we're probably averaging 35, 40, 50K watching at one time. You put us on ESPN, we're immediately 500, 600. The exposure is dramatically grown. So I always push back when someone calls someone a sellout because like money talks, shit walks. And in business, you're either growing or you're dying. So you always got to look to grow. And the more you grow, the more people you add, the more expensive it gets. So I understand why he did it. And I think he understands that made some, kind of like, if you get me, this is what you're getting. The problem is like, you're on television. There are some rules, he's going to have to, and he's even said that, like, can't just drop an F-bomb, but that won't be tolerated. And I think ESPN is trying to, figure out a way to be kind of more relevant than they've become. Because I felt their brand has never been less strong in my lifetime, right? Forever, it was just trending up. And now it feels like it's carried by a couple guys and some games, right? You remove a couple of their newsbreakers, Woj and Schefter in the games. Like, are we really watching much of it? Not really. I know I'm not. And I am their demo, a 37-year-old sports junkie. And if you don't have either on a live event I want to watch, like today, I'm watching the PGA Championship, or a personality I want to watch, and they don't have any one of those anymore, I'm not turning on your channel. And I think ratings speak for itself, the cord cutting. So they're trying to adapt. And I give them credit because this is the guy you would go after. It's going to be fascinating to see if it works. I would say that it's going to be bumpy and people are going to complain. And because that's just a lot of the type people they have under their umbrella, complain a lot, always bitching and moaning, always, pointing the finger at someone else. And most of those people that are doing that aren't that important. They're very, I hate to say it, fireable, replaceable, and Pat now is not, right? So he's kind of untouchable. And it'll be interesting to watch how this all plays out. As he transitions, I would imagine by football season, he'll be full-time ESPN.